I have something prepared. It's a little formal for such a small group, but I'll go through it. It's a little bit technical, but I see that we have some scholarly people here also, so you won't mind if it's a tiny bit technical. The title of this is called Yajnavalkya and Maitreyi, an interesting dialogue, something like that. Yeah, this is a very well-known dialogue. It's referred to many times. Swami Vivekananda. When we go through the lectures of Swami Vivekananda, we find that he never spoke very systematically about the Upanishads or Gita, because he was speaking to an audience in the West that didn't know very much. It would have been lost on them. But some of the Upanishads he went through almost from beginning to end. Kathopanishad, Ishopanishad, and Mundakopanishad. This Brihadaranyaka also, and Chandogya Upanishad, those two, he also took many sections from it and devoted some of his lectures to them without telling them. He would just give a certain topic, covering everything with God. He didn't say, and now I'll speak on the Ishopanishad, but basically it was a talk on the Ishopanishad. So Swamiji, we get Swamiji's own interpretation of some of these very important Upanishadic passages. And sometimes they're quite different. And this particular passage is interesting because the range of meanings and interpretations is huge. It goes from one side, we'll get to it, one side where the interpretation of some of the terms Atman, for example, just refers to one's own self. And we find that all love is a kind of selfish affair. To the other extreme, where all love is based on the Atman, on the divine dwelling within. So it's interesting to see how the original dialogue takes place, the different range of meanings, and what I tried to do in this talk is to show how all of the different meanings are valid, and all of them are helpful, and that perhaps the Upanishad is purposefully ambiguous, so we can get all of these different ranges of meaning. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and Chandogya Upanishad, these are the two oldest Upanishads. Many of the other Upanishads are more consistent. There'll be one whole story, or there'll be some dialogue. These early Upanishads were a little piecemeal. There would be a story here, something there, and all put together like that. But we find that all of them have the very highest flights of spiritual wisdom. And the Upanishads are the real gems. When we talk about Vedanta, we really mean the Upanishads. Gita and Brahma Sutras secondarily. They also forms part of Vedanta, and then we also include Puranas and everything that follows. But the real original meaning is the Upanishads. So we find that these are tremendously important. They're very early. They're much earlier than the time of Christ, earlier than the time of Buddha. Possibly Buddha came at the very end of this Upanishadic period. And just to give some perspective, these Upanishads, they come as the fourth section in the Vedas. You know that the Vedas are separated. Originally there was one Veda. And Vyasa, you know how Vyasa got his name. This is just a title. Veda Vyasa. He was the one who separated that one into four. So then there became four. And then of these four, each one has four different sections to it. And the first two combined are called the Karmakanda. These have to do with the ritual and the hymns. And the Samhita, this is the portion that we hold to be revealed. That these ancient rishis, they somehow heard these hymns of the Rig Veda. There were men and female rishis both, and this is the revelation portion, we could say. The second portion, Brahmanas, has to do with ritual and daily life and all those things, how we use these different Vedic hymns and put everything together. So this is all the ritualistic portion. Then the third portion is Aranyaka. Now we notice this Brihad Aranyaka, that this Aranyaka, this is what's meant to be used in the Aranya, in the forest. These are sometimes called forest books. And so this goes to also to this, the 4 stages of life, that we have this, the ashrama idea, varnashrama idea, the 4 different stages. So when they retire into the forest, husband and wife together, then there are certain texts that they use, and they're called aranyakas, and they take a lot of the ritualistic things and allow them to be done symbolically, and because in the forest people couldn't procure all of the things they need for the very elaborate rituals and things, and also it starts to become more towards this jnana conduct, this knowledge. And then finally the Upanishads, which really are meant for the sannyasis. So that also corresponds to the final stage of life. But this is all in theory. If we look at the Upanishads, some of them actually are found in earlier portions. Even the Samhita portion we'll find in the Upanishad like that. So this is Brihad Aranyaka. This will also span this Aranyaka portion. So it's called the Great Forest Text, Brihad Aranyaka. So we can picture this dialogue taking place in some forest retreat. Most of what we find of the Upanishads, it's either in some forest retreat or in a palace with a king. Swami Vivekananda was very proud of the fact that the Kshatriyas played a very important role in the Upanishads. He used to like to poke the Brahmins a little bit that way. He said the real heroes of the Upanishads are the Kshatriyas, King Janaka and others. We find Yajnavalkya is the Brahmin going to King Janaka in order to beg for a few extra cows and a few things like that. And then they engage in dialogue. They had an arrangement that Janaka said, yes, I'll be your patron, but come every once in a while. We'll discuss philosophy, things like that. And it turns out that Janaka is equally as wise, if not wiser, than Yajnavalkya and others. Now, this particular section, this dialogue between Yajnavalkya and his wife, one of his 2 wives, Maitreyi, this actually occurs twice in this Upanishad. And it refers back to what I was talking about, these stages of life. That in the 4th stage, sannyasa, the first we have the Brahmacari stage, the student stage. It was supposed to be, sometimes they say, 12 years and 24 years, and that they would break it into areas. But anyhow, where the student studies with the teacher in the forest, and at the age of 24, then takes to householder life, so becomes a Guryasta, and then has children and family. And also the 4 aims of life go with all of these together. So then Arthakama, the householder has an obligation to earn some money and to possess something to leave to the family and to help society and all of that. So Arthakama, these are necessary for the householder stage of life. Then husband and wife turn everything over to kids, retire, let the son run the business, they go into the forest, they live together, and the final stage of life is where each will go his own separate way and take the sannyasa. Now, in the long history of the Indian social structure, we can say, there were all different ideas, whether one was allowed to take sannyasa without going through the householder stage. There were some who said, no, you have to become a householder and fulfill these desires before you're ready to renounce. Then others said, no, you can go directly from the Brahmacari stage to the sannyasa stage, which of course is what we do. Then others said, no, there are only 3 stages of life. The sannyasi doesn't belong to society. That's not considered one of the stages of life. So there were different opinions. Anyhow, this is the whole setting for this, because Yajnavalkya decides one day that it's time for him to renounce everything. And to go off on his own to search for God realization. This is the ultimate aim of life. We have the 4 aims of life I was talking about. So this dharma, we need to guide us throughout the whole lifetime. And then the householder stage, kama and artha, and then moksha or mukti. And striving for that ultimate realization or knowledge which will give liberation. So that's the final goal of life. And in order to achieve that, one renounces everything. This was the old system that we have. It's, how much it was followed, we don't know, but at least it was highly respected. And in this Upanishad, it's all based on that idea. Now, the Yajnavalkya had 2 wives. And we shouldn't be too surprised, because in the old days, they were allowed to have, men could have more than 1 wife. We sometimes think that this is only in Islam or Mormons. Also, we kind of look down as polygamy and everything. But there were things in the scriptures which allowed a Brahmin can have 3 wives. This was an address that Bhishma gave to King Yudhishthira in Mahabharata. That a Brahmin can have 3 wives, Kshatriya can have 2 wives, Vaishya, he should take a wife only from his own caste. So that meant that the others there could be intermarriage even. A lot of these things we don't think about too much. And the children born of these wives should be regarded as equal. Anyhow, we know from Ramayana, right? King Bharat, he had his 3 wives, which was the cause of the whole problem. The jealousy between the wives and all of that. And actually, did you know that polygamy was only outlawed in India in 1954? Yeah. So many years after independence. So it was still, even today, I think. Yeah. And of course, provisions, if there's no child, they can take a second wife. There are always provisions for something like that. Okay, now there's some interesting things here. One is that each of the wives is considered to be the equal of the other. So it's not like there's a first one and then the other ones are secondary. And in order for Yajnavalkya to renounce the world, he had to get the consent of both of the wives. Now, of the 2 wives, we don't hear too much about the this second one, Katyayani. We only hear about Maitreyi. So these were the 2 wives. And Yajnavalkya, first he goes to Maitreyi and he says that I want to renounce everything. And so I'm thinking of splitting my possessions, my money and my possessions, everything, evenly among the 2 of you. Right? And he's asking for permission. So this is how the whole thing starts. This is how the dialogue starts. He announces his decision to renounce the world, and Maitreyi and Katyayani both have to give their permission, and he proposes splitting all of his wealth among the 2 of them. Now, we don't hear, as I said, much about Katyayani, but Maitreyi is very spiritually evolved. He's a very intelligent and sensitive woman, and her response is very interesting. She had this spiritual insight that, first of all, we don't see any weeping and wailing, what will happen to me, nothing like that. So she understood that this was his right, and it was her duty as a good wife to allow him to seek this ultimate wisdom, because it was a life of hardship also, begging food and living under a tree and all of that. So, so this is that what we would say today, the very rare husband and wife. And it's interesting that this similar type of conversation took place between Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother when the Holy Mother was only 18 years old. Right? And Sri Ramakrishna said to her, look, you're my wife, you have this right, if you want, to bring me down to the world. You have every right to require me as your husband, to fulfill the obligations of a husband and family and children and all of that, even though my desire to, my whole life is given to God and everything. And then she said, why would I want to do that? Why? I've only come to help you in your spiritual life, not to lead you into a worldly life or anything like that. So we find that there's an interesting kind of parallel between Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Now, what was the reply that Maitreyi gave? First of all, she asked a question of him. And the question she said was, well, you want to give your wealth to me, but what exactly will I gain by that? She said, suppose the entire universe and all its wealth were mine, would that bring me immortality? Now, amrita, this immortality doesn't mean that we live forever. It means we transcend death. It means we go beyond this round of birth and death, what will take me to the highest truth and to liberation. Will I get that from this, all of this wealth? And Yajnavalkya replies, no, your life would be just the same as other people with property and wealth. He wasn't a wealthy person. He had something, mostly patronage from King Janaka. He said, but there's no hope of immortality through wealth and possessions. So that's very clear. And we all know that whatever we accumulate in this lifetime, it's of some value to us here and now, but ultimately it may be value to somebody else after that. But if we're talking about God realization, there's no cause and effect there. It's not that the more we accumulate, the more intelligent or the more spiritual we become. Sometimes the opposite. So, this was his reply to her, that no, it won't help you. Then she gives a very brilliant and wonderful reply. She says, Yena aham na amrasyam, kim aham tena kuryam. What will I do with that which will not bring me immortality? See, Yena aham, that by which na amrasyat, I will not become immortal. So you're giving me something that won't lead me to the highest truth. Kim aham tena kuryam, what good will it do? What value, is there any value whatsoever in that? So it shows that she also had that same ideal as her husband, that at the end of life there's only one goal, and this is liberation, God realization, however we understand it. This is the self-realization, that this is the only goal, and you're giving me something that won't lead to that, then why would I want it? Now she could say that, well, you won't be around anymore, who will look after me? I should have at least a little something so I don't have to beg my food, but she didn't even say that. So she had no interest in any of this at all. Now, Yajnavalkya was so happy. He was overjoyed to see, not that because she didn't want his wealth, but because she had such a clear insight. And he said to her, you were dear to me before, and even more so now, since you seek to know that truth which is dearest to my heart. If you like, I will try to explain it to you, and as I explain it, you also have to try to meditate on it, this nididhyasana. This we know is Vedanta has a certain method where first we have to listen very carefully to these truths, then we have to think about them deeply, and then meditate. So this is that final stage. So this is the introduction to this long passage, which is really the heart of this dialogue that we'll get, and which is, I don't know if you want to say controversial, but a little ambiguous, what it actually means. And this is a section that is quoted so many times, and we've all heard it, I'm sure, many times, that sometimes we hear something often enough, we think we know what it means. But we really, if we really try to explain to somebody else exactly what does that mean, we realize that it's not very clear. So this is why I want to go through this a little bit. I'll read the Sanskrit for the first line because it's repeated 11 times with just one variation, with a couple of variations internally of different words. It starts out, Navaya ade patyuhu kamaya patihi priyo bhavati, Atmanastu kamaya patihi priyo bhavati. So, verily, and it's going to be hard to translate it without giving away the different interpretations. I'll try to give at least the two major ways of looking at this. Generally, we read, it is not for the sake of the husband. It is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is dear. But more literally, we could say, it is not out of desire for the husband that the husband is dear. It is for the sake of, or out of desire for the Atman, or the self, or lower self, or oneself. Now, this will be very, very unclear to all of you. I know that, right? Because it won't be until we'll go through each of these different options first. So otherwise, it's too many things all at once, because there are all of these different interpretations. So this is repeated 11 times, substituting. In the beginning, it says, it is not for the sake of the husband. Then we get, it is not for the sake of the wife, for the sons, wealth, animals, and it goes all the way down the line to other possessions that we have. And according to Shankaracharya, in descending order of importance. So we start out, it is not for the sake of the husband, then for the wife, then for sons, then wealth, animals, and goes all the way down there. Now, a lot of this hinges on how we understand this idea for the sake of the Atman, because this term is used in many different ways. We know Atman as being one with the Brahman, as the highest self, pure consciousness, functioning within as the witness. We know all of that. Sometimes Atman is used as identical with mind. And sometimes it means Jivatman, the individual, so-called, apparently individual self. Sometimes even the body, or this whole complex. And sometimes it's a reflexive pronoun. So it can mean myself. I did it myself. It can be used that way also. So we'll find that this verse can mean we don't love the other for the sake of the other, but for our own sake. You'll see how the meaning changes. If we say, but for the sake of the self, for the sake of God dwelling within, very high meaning. Or if we say that it's for the sake of really for my own sake. I love you for my own sake, because I get something out of it. Then it changes the whole meaning. So it's highly ambiguous, this section, or perhaps we can say very fluid and flexible, so that it allows these different types of interpretations. Now I'm going to start with Shankaracharya, because apparently what Shankaracharya says and what Swamiji says are the two opposite ends of the spectrum, polar opposites, by the way. And even some of our Swamis who, when these verses are translated, they'll give two alternative things. I think when we look very carefully at Swamiji's explanation of all of this, he accepts both. But anyhow, we'll start with Shankaracharya, and this is what I call the tough love angle. This is, I'm going to tell it to you like it is. This is Yajnavalkya, that he wants to tell his wife, whatever little attachment you have to this world, to objects of the world, to people, you analyze it. You see that there's selfishness behind it. He's telling her that to break that type of attachment. So we can take it that way, that we like to think that worldly people and selfish people have this attitude, but the bottom line is for everyone, and unless it's something that I benefit from, it's something that I take some joy out of, why will I have a relationship with anybody else? It seems to be just a It sounds a little cynical. It sounds a little cynical, or maybe we can say a little too realistic or a little too harsh or something. We can soften it and say that true love is something very rare, but it's very rare. Even Sri Ramakrishna says that among all of the gopis, it was Radha alone. She was the only one who was happy when Krishna was happy, even if she was unhappy. Didn't matter. She didn't care about herself. The second class was, we want Krishna to be happy, we also want to be happy. Or we want to be the ones making him happy. And the third class said, I want to be it. I want to be the one to serve him, even if he'd rather be served by somebody else, doesn't matter. So that's purely, but Radha alone represented that highest class of perfectly unselfish love. So we see how rare it is. The mother loves the child, loves son is helpless, a baby child. The son grows up one day and says, I want to become a monk. Well, how happy will the mother be? In India, this came as a bit of a shock to me. But I found the worst thing that a son can say to his mother is, I want to be a sannyasi. Even devotees, they're rare. There are some, of course. There's some. What did your parents think?
No, it took a while.
Tough.
It was very hard for them.
Yeah. It's not exactly selfishness, but attachment. This is the thing. There's tremendous attachment. Of course, in our order, the parents can still see the son, and it's not in the really orthodox tradition. You took sannyasa, and you could go back and see the family after 12 years once, and that was it. Otherwise, you really renounced the family that way. So, this is a very harsh interpretation of this verse, but we understand that Shankaracharya takes it this way because he begins his commentary with a statement. He says, with the view to teaching discrimination as a means to immortality. So this discrimination between selfishness and unselfishness, what is real love, what is worldly love. Yajnavalkya creates a distaste for the wife, husband, sons, etc., so that they may be given up. Now, why a distaste? Because she'll understand also that the husband, who she thinks loves her so selflessly, is only what he gets out of it, that there's some selfishness behind it. So that'll also help cut that type of attachment. This is a very harsh way of looking at it. There's a whole long tradition with all of this. This idea of, it's called Pratipaksha Bhavana, where we look at the dark side of things in order to break our attachment to something which otherwise has this great magnetism for us. It's a very common theme. We have it in Buddhist texts, we have it in other texts before, also in a lot of Vedantic texts. So this is the way he's trying, according to Shankaracharya, Yajnavalkya is trying to tell this Maitreyi, after all, this worldly love is nothing compared to the search for truth. So he's trying to help her get over whatever attachment she might have had to all of this. Now we read in some of these other texts, especially the Bhaja Govindam. Are you familiar with Bhaja Govindam?
No.
Many of you? Okay. This is a wonderful, wonderful hymn that was written by Shankaracharya. Has nothing to do with the devotion, really. This is a Bhaja Govindam, but it's all about the very stark type of discrimination. The story is that Shankaracharya was going for a bath in the Ganga in Kashi one day, and he happened to see a very old man sitting by the banks of the Ganga, reciting these Panini rules of grammar. And he took pity on him. And he said, Bhaja Govindam, worship the Lord. Bhaja Govindam, Godhamade. Oh, foolish person. Samprapte sannahite kali, when this final moment comes, this moment of death, nahi rakshati dukran karane. Dukran karane. This is one of the rules. This is like somebody reciting I before E except after C, I before E except after C, some silly grammatical rule, spelling rule, something like that. He said that won't save you when the time of death comes. And then there are all of these different verses, very, very strong things. We have this, I'll read a couple of them, they're beautiful. The Bhaju Govindam, you read it and you'll just be filled with dispassion. Filled with dispassion, what this world is really like, the hollow nature of this world. Yavit vitto parjana saktas tava niji parivaro rakta pascha jivati jar dehe vartam kopina pritchati gehe. Yavit pavano nivasati dehe tavat pritchati kushalam gehe gatavati vayo deha paye bharya vibhyati tasmin kaye. As long as you have the ability to earn money, so long will your dependents be attached to you. After that, when you live with an infirm body, no one would even speak to you a word. So this is talking about the worldly love. That as long as there is a breath in the body, so long people in the household ask about one's welfare. Once the breath leaves on the destruction of the body, the dependents dread that very same body. They won't touch it. Now it's not just Shankaracharya. Don't think that Shankaracharya alone was this old cynical Karmajan who didn't care for the world or anything like that. Thakur himself, he tells two stories that are even worse than this. That the one disciple goes to his teacher and the teacher is saying, nobody is your very own except God. And then he said, no, but my mother and my father and my wife and children, they love me so much. So he said, okay, let's really see. And then he says, I'm going to give you a pill. You take this pill when you go home. After a short while, you'll seem to lose consciousness and the body will seem to go cold. People will think that you're dead, but you'll be able to hear everything. Yeah. So he said, okay. So he did it, and the body is lying there as if dead, and everyone is weeping and wailing, and oh, we loved him so much, this and that. And then the teacher comes in the guise of some wandering holy man who knows some medicines and things like that. So he comes and he says, oh, why is everyone crying? And they said, see, our son has died. She said, husband has died. And he says, oh, you know, I have a medicine that I can give that will bring him back to life. So they're so happy and everything. He says, but one of you will also have to take it, that person will die. So he says, surely you all love him so much. Surely one of you will be happy to do this to bring him back to life. So then the father is thinking, yes, but I'm the main money earner and everything. If I'm not there, what will happen? And the mother says, I have other children to look after. And then the own wife says, he asked what to do, it was his fate. So in the meantime, the effects of the pill have worn off, and he looks at the teacher and says, yes, now I understand. And then he walks on. Then the second story is even worse, because they're very similar. But in this version, he ends up sitting in, say, Padmasana. The legs are crossed, and as if he goes into samadhi and dies that way. So again, they're weeping and wailing and everything, but they have to take the body out and cremate it, and they find because of the position that he's in, that he doesn't fit through the door. Oh. Right. So somebody takes an axe. Now remember, he can hear everything. He only looks like he's dead. Somebody takes an axe to start cutting down the door jamb so that they can get the body through the door. So the wife says, wait, what are you doing? They said, well, that's the only way we can get him out. So the wife says that poor man is dead, we're going to cremate him, and who will pay for the house repair? Why not chop his body up and take him nothing? So then, he comes to and says, so this is the extent to which that my wife really loves me. And then he goes off with the teacher.
Now I know that he doesn't love me.
Yeah, so this is, yeah. So these are not to be taken too literally, but just to understand that there's a difference between this love of God and worldly love. And of course we strive to be selfless in our love, but pure selflessness in these worldly relationships is something very, very difficult. Anyhow, this is only one way of looking at this verse, and I think that there are other nicer ways of doing it. And let's go right to, okay, this other use of the word Atman. Now, it may not be that this verse is saying, that Yajnavalkya is trying to say that we're simply using other people, that we don't care for other people. Maybe that he's really saying that the relationship is meaningful because of the Atman. Somehow it's something to do with the self, but that what he's really saying is that what we're really seeking is union with God. What we're really seeking is to be fulfilled, that we feel an emptiness, we feel a lack, we feel that there's something that hasn't been accomplished within. And we wrongfully think that we'll be able to fill that, we'll be able to satisfy that longing and that need through possessions and through relationships. And Yajnavalkya is trying to say that love that we feel for others really is because we're seeking this kamaya. We have a desire, atmanas, that we have a desire for the self. And we don't know where to find it, and we don't know how to turn within. So we're trying to fulfill that emptiness within, that longing for union within, in the only way that we know, with some external way of doing it. So this will be the second type of interpretation. When the husband loves the wife, or when the wife loves the husband, this is that way of trying to find that missing link, to complement themselves with something, to fill some vague void that we have within. Because this sense of union that we have with the indwelling divine is something that is permanent. It's our real nature, but we've lost it, we've forgotten it. And that this is the driving force in all relationships, whether we know it or not. That we seek union with another person, it's because we're really seeking union with God. We don't know it, we don't understand it, but that's the one thing that will fulfill that emptiness, that empty feeling forever. Now, think of the Mundaka example of the two birds on the same tree. Right. The lower bird is trying to fulfill desires by eating the fruits, not realizing that it will only be fulfilled with union with the bird at the top. And then as soon as it starts to realize it, it gives up the fruit. So this verse can be taken that way, that it's misplaced, that this all the human relationships, we're trying to fulfill something, and it works to a certain extent. But ultimately we can only fulfill it when we have that real union with the divine within. Now, slightly higher way of looking at all of this is that no human relationships make any sense without this idea that the self is behind it. That the person that we're having this relationship with, this loving relationship with, if we can't feel that they're also a conscious living human being. It's not just what I get out of it, but we want them also to experience something. We have to feel that same divine light is behind them. Then we get a little higher, and that loving relationship becomes even more intense when we realize it's the same self. It's the very same self within. There was a very beautiful story that Swamiji told. It's a Sufi story about a man who came to see his beloved, and she was behind the door, and he knocked on the door, and she said, "Who is it?" And he said, "It is I." And then she didn't open the door, and she asked again, "Who is it?" He said, "It is I." And still she wouldn't open. Third time she asked, "Who is it?" And he said, "It is your very own self." And then the door opened. So he could also be saying, Yajnavalkya to his wife, that it's out of this desire to have this communion with the self dwelling in the other person, that we also have this type of idea. Now, Swamiji, we'll see, goes through all of these different ideas, that all of our human relationships are partly a substitute, that we're trying to achieve something that we don't know any other way of doing it, but also this is the way the divine manifests itself also. And if we see everything as divine, all that exists are thou. Swamiji used to sing that song. All that exists are thou. We see everything as divine. It changes that type of relationship. So then really, the love we feel for others is because God dwells within the other. The Atman is present, the Atman is Brahman. It's the same self dwelling within. This is the real source of that love between husband and wife, between mother and father and child, every relationship that we have. So Swamiji directly addresses this dialogue in one of his lectures. Which lecture was it? I don't have it. Anyhow, and we see that he accepts at the beginning Shankaracharya's idea and then expands it and takes us to this very final idea. He says, and he starts with his own translation. It is not for the sake of the husband that the wife loves the husband, but for the sake of the Atman. Now, he doesn't say, but for one's own sake. He says, for the sake of the Atman, that she loves the husband, because she loves the self. So she loves the self within, she sees the self in the husband, so it starts out that way. None loves the wife for the sake of the wife, but it is because one loves the self that one loves the wife. You eliminate this divine presence within, there's nothing to attract. None loves the children for the children, but because one loves the self, therefore one loves the children. None loves wealth on account of the wealth, but because one loves the self, therefore one loves wealth. None loves the Brahman, so now we're getting all 11. For the sake of the Brahman, but because one loves the self, one loves the Brahman. So, none loves the Kshatriya for the sake of the Kshatriya, but because one loves the self. Neither does anyone love the world on account of the world, but because one loves the self. None similarly loves the gods on account of the gods, but because one loves the self. None loves a thing for that thing's sake, but it is for the self that one loves it. The self, therefore, and this is how the whole section ends. The self, therefore, is to be heard. This is, I mentioned the three things that we have first. Shrotavyam. Is to be heard, is to be reasoned. Mantavyam, and meditated upon. Oh my Maitreyi, when that self has been heard, when that self has been seen, when that self has been realized, then all this becomes known. Alright, so all of this is just Swamiji's own translation of these words. Then he gives his explanation. He says, what do we get then? Before us we find a curious philosophy. The statement has been made that every love is selfishness in the lowest sense of the word. Because I love myself, therefore I love another. So he's starting out with that interpretation. Then he says, it cannot be. Now, he's not saying that this can't be that right interpretation. He's saying that there has to be something higher that is the real source of love. That the real source of love is selfish because we don't know what the real source of love is. We don't realize what's behind it. Okay, there have been philosophers in modern times who have said that self is the only motive power in the world. That is true. Now, so Swamiji is agreeing with this whole thing. That is true, and yet it is wrong. So, it's true that this has been the main motive power throughout the history of the world, selfishness. And that's why the world is such a mess. And that's why there's wars and competition and poverty and all of the problems because of selfishness. So he's admitting that this is the history of things, that this is what it is, and also admitting that it's wrong and it doesn't have to be that way and shouldn't be that way. But the self is but the shadow of that real self which is behind. It appears wrong and evil because it is small, that infinite love for the self, which is the universe. So, everything is the manifestation of the divine. That's the real attraction, not because we get some selfish pleasure out of it, but because at the heart of everything is this Brahman. It appears wrong and evil because it is small. The infinite love for the self, which is the universe, appears to be evil, appears to be small, because it appears through a small part. Even when the wife loves the husband, whether she knows it or not, she loves the husband for that self. You know, now we're faced with this prospect of robots all over the place. Right. Now we have a robot who can show affection in every possible way. But we know there's no consciousness there. We can't have a relationship that way. The self has to be there. That awareness has to be there on the other side.
Well, that's a quick question. So when you say you love the self in the wealth, what does that really mean? So in what sense can you say there is self in the wealth?
In the wealth. Not so much in the wealth, in the sense that everything is a manifestation of Brahman. That way, at the heart of it. This is something that, of course, we get it in the Upanishads. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahman. Everything indeed is nothing but this Brahman. That Brahman itself manifests as the universe. But this is something that we know really through the vision of these great mystics, Sri Ramakrishna especially.
From the perspective of daily life, that's just very outlandish. Though, I mean, once we have that experience, it may not sound outlandish anymore.
Yes, for us to say that I see that this is nothing but God, and for of course it's just talk. It's just talk. But through reason we can understand the philosophy behind it, that if this Brahman is the sole reality, and this Brahman projects this universe, that this universe will have Brahman as its material cause as well as its instrumental cause. It will be nothing but Brahman in a manifest form. And so this is the yukti, this is the philosophy behind it. But it will be the vision of these God-realized souls that will be the real proof. Sri Ramakrishna used to go into that state where he would say, I see that everything is nothing but chidghana, as if congealed consciousness. He would say, just as you see fruit, the artificial fruit, it's all made of wax. It looks different, but the substance is the same. It all looks like it's all separate things, made of different things and everything, but it's nothing but consciousness, chidghana, chidmaya. That was its vision and experience. Yeah, for us, either we're making big claims or just talk, or it's something that we're trying to understand. Yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, either Brahman has to have some building material to use, or there has to be some separate thing, which could be. We have our Sankhya, other systems like that. But if we like this idea that ultimate reality is only one, and is pure consciousness, then everything has to be a manifestation of that. At heart, that same reality. The ultimate teaching of Advaita Vedanta is that this relationship between cause and effect is a relationship of oneness. That the effect is nothing but the cause in a different form. So if Brahman is the underlying cause, then Brahman is the reality. So everything is nothing but Brahman. For us, that's not the real reason why something attracts us. It attracts us because it tastes good, it looks good, through the senses and everything. But even that is some desire to fulfill some need that we have. Even we have some hunger to take food. We even know psychologically that many people who have eating disorders, that it's because they're frustrated in some other aspect of life, which they can't fulfill, so they fulfill it by eating. So spiritually, we do this with everything. That even trying to fulfill our desires with physical objects and possessions and everything is because we don't recognize that there's a spiritual void. Okay, let me finish this. Even when the wife loves the husband, whether she knows it or not, she loves the husband for that self. It is selfishness as it is manifested in the world. So he's admitting that. But that selfishness is really but a small part of that selfness, capital S, selfness. Whenever one loves, one has to love in and through the self. Then he goes on in the second paragraph. Every time we particularize an object, we differentiate it from the self. So it's true, we don't recognize this. In fact, we start out with this big distinction. Anything that's changing is not the self. In 1880, we discriminate, we eliminate it, it's not Brahman. Only afterwards we realize, I'm trying to love a woman. As soon as that woman is particularized, she is separated from the Atman, and my love for her will not be eternal, but will end in grief. But as soon as I see that woman as the Atman, that means when I see God dwelling within. When I see God dwelling within. This is Sri Ramakrishna. He used to give both things. He would say in the beginning, he would tell these young disciples that don't get attached to women, what's in that body, blood, flesh, all of this. But he would say this is a very early stage. You'll reach the point when you'll see, no, all the manifestation of the Divine Mother. This is what you want to get at. So both are true. Both are true. We want to cut that attachment, but afterwards we want to see the divine within everything. But as soon as I see that woman as the Atman, that love becomes perfect and will never suffer. So with everything. See, if the love is based on physical beauty, how quickly it goes. Right? If it's based on the mind, it'll last longer. But even that can go. If it's based on something deeper than that even, then it'll be changeless. So with everything. As soon as you are attached to anything in the universe, detaching it from the universe as a whole, from the Atman, there comes a reaction. With everything that we love outside the self, grief and misery will be the result. If we enjoy everything in the self and as the self, no misery or reaction will come. This is perfect bliss. Now, when we go through this whole section, the reason, I'll give my final push for Swamiji's interpretation, why I don't think it's just a Yajnavalkya telling his wife that everything is selfishness in the world, that cut your attachment, all of that he's really trying to tell her that it's all selfishness until that relationship is based on the divine. The reason comes with the very final direction to her, when he says to her, Are va are, Atma va are, drashtavya. The self has to be realized. So there's before we were taking it as just for, we love the other for our own sake. But now he's saying that Atman, no, we're talking about Brahman here. So, drashtavya, shrotavyo, mantavyo, nidithyasitavyo, Maitreyi. Verily, my dear Maitreyi, the self has to be realized, it has to be seen. This is the goal of life. You must first hear about it, shravana, then reflect deeply on it, manana, and then meditate on it, nidithyasana. Then he says, when you know the self, you will know everything that is to be known. And that's how that section is. So this is a very fascinating, interesting dialogue. We hear about it so often, it's referred to so many times in different lectures and things and everything, but there's so many subtle layers and levels to it that we can really get so much out of it, from the nature of worldly love and selfishness to the higher sense of attraction we feel for other people, whether we know it or not, and that ultimate seeing the divine in everyone. Seeing the divine in everyone, that type of attachment doesn't bind us. So this is the advice that Yajnavalkya gave to his wife Maitreyi when he was about to renounce the world.
In Belur, I heard a conversation. Somebody told me. Brahmacari was asking a question to a senior monk. How do I realize God? His answer is, be selfish.
Okay, did he explain it?
Then, yeah, what is that? You want exactly opposite. Then he started explaining the way Maharaj was telling now. What really means by that answer selfish is not what you consider as traditional way of conversation, this far beyond.
Yeah, selfishness is based on a very strong identification with the ego sense, with the lower self, based on all types of ignorance and everything. Yeah, if we can realize the real nature of the self, then we know the real nature of everyone, and then we feel oneness with everyone. All of the distinctions that we have between ourselves and other people are based on very superficial external things, cultural things, physical things, customs, language, all of that. We have to be able to transcend all of these external things. Then we can feel love and oneness with everyone, and it doesn't bind us. We don't need anything to get anything out of it. That's enough. It's not what it can do for me or what I can do for the other, and that bargaining doesn't become a part of it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In fact, you said about the Yajnavalkya and Maitreyi's dialogue. Now, it seems that, Yajnavalkya was already, profound philosopher, and who, had the, he was realized by the knowledge of Brahman. And so my first part of the question is it something that he tells Maitreyi that, okay, the ultimate source of knowledge is Brahman, and then you, meditate upon it, and then only you will realize, you will get that. So, since he was already a realized soul, in a sense, that he had probably the vision of the self, and so couldn't he transmit that knowledge so that, because he was his wife, or maybe a student, or an astute student, so couldn't he really give that piece of pure knowledge that would kind of probably show the door immediately into God realization?
I think we have to assume that Yajnavalkya was a very wise man who had a very deep understanding of scriptures and Vedanta and all of that, but was not necessarily a fully realized soul. Otherwise, there would be no need for holiness.
So in that context, my second question that follows it, is it something that it was in the Brahmacari Upanishad, is it actually made as a symbolic self? One is a lower self as a Maitreyi, and the higher self as Yajnavalkya. And the higher self symbolically is teaching in the lower self that you have to come to the higher self. Is it kind of a symbolic interpretation too, or is it something that?
I never thought of that. I think we can take it as face value.
Okay.
That this is simply wisdom that he's imparting to her is for him also. Only he understands it, but he has to realize it. He's also, when he gives the final instruction, that you have to think deeply about these things. This is the point of going off alone, to be able to think deeply about all of these things and ultimately to realize to realize these things directly. We don't, this idea of transferring and giving some realization, this is more part of the school of yoga. These Vedantic truths were not so much imparted. It was the idea was that the student had to become perfectly ready for it.
Right.
And then it wasn't that the teacher, the power of realization that the teacher had infused the words with some special thing that it conferred liberation on the student. It was that the student was ready, and the teacher knew it. And the teacher simply had to say Tattvamasi.
Yeah.
That was enough. In the life of Sri Ramakrishna, of course, he could touch someone.
Yes.
He could go like this, raise it up.
That's why.
But we don't assume that this Yajnavalkya had that type of spiritual power that way, or even realization. But he certainly had a very clear understanding of all of this.
Because Upanishad keeps on telling us, as you said,
Yeah.
particularly these two, I mean the Chandogya Upanishad and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad are the older testaments over
Yes.
here. And so there are some inconsistencies in that. Inconsistent in the sense that it is probably saying the one thing but in different shades of grey on that one. But at the same time, so is it something that they are trying to address to all these different types of people?
Yeah, now this is also one of Swamiji's theories was that the Upanishads teach all the schools of Vedanta.
Yes.
That there will be passages that lend themselves to a dualistic interpretation, and some non-dualistic and some in between. Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. And he faulted all of the commentators, whether it was Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, all of them, for trying to torture the text, to play around with the Sanskrit sometimes, and to show that it really meant what they wanted it to mean. Now, in fairness to the commentators, they had certain rules that they had to follow. One is they have to show consistency throughout. So they did their best to show that everything was trying to lead to this particular point of view. But Swamiji's idea was that these truths are expressed in different ways. And he got this from Sri Ramakrishna, that there's no contradiction, that these are different stages of knowledge, or he used to give the example, I'm looking at a room, either standing in the middle of the room or a corner, it'll look different, but it's the same room. Or the same sun, you go closer to it, it'll be larger, but the size of the sun hasn't changed. Just our vantage point has changed a little bit. So I won't say there are inconsistencies. I'll say that sometimes they speak from the point of view, from a more dualistic point of view, that's all. The final word on this statement is the verse that Sri Ramakrishna himself refers to, where Hanuman is asked by Ramchandra, how you look upon me. And he says, the question of how I look upon myself. If I have some body consciousness and identification, then I'm a dualist. You're the master and I'm your servant. But if I happen to feel more connected with this body, mind, complex, this jiva and everything, then I feel I'm a part of you. And then he says, but when I realize that I'm the self, the Atman, then no distinction. You and I are one and the same. So the Upanishads can speak freely in all these. The Upanishads are not strict philosophy. The Upanishads are poetry. I'm fully convinced that we have to read them as poetry, and they inspire us. And so much allegory is there. We have this concept of this non-dual, impersonal Brahman, who's sitting around and looking around and not seeing anything and feeling bored and saying, may I become many. Now, it has to be allegory. We can say, oh, it proves that they believe in a personal God. But we shouldn't take it that literally. This is a beautiful poetry to try to explain something which can't be explained. How this universe comes into existence.
So it's part of applying, the message that you gave in this lecture into our daily lives. At least one of the messages I got was to see everything as a manifestation of Brahman and try to cultivate a spiritual relationship with anything that shows up in your life. So
try to avoid this selfishness. This selfishness brings attachment and misery, and the relationship shouldn't be about what it can do for me. This is one element of it, is what do I get out of it. And of course we want to get some satisfaction out of the relationship and possessions and things like that, but ultimately it's only the something higher which will satisfy us.